saw a monthly increase of 9.2% in April after non-essential shops reopened. The weather, wet and windy for many, a high of 13 degrees.
LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb. Delays on the M25 anti-clockwise to junction 12 at the M3, and that's because of an accident, but all the lanes are now back open. And also delays on the M25 anti-clockwise to junction 25 at the A10 after a van broke down earlier, but that's also been recovered. But long delays continue on the A10 northbound up to the M25 junction because at Bullsmore Lane there's been an accident, and in Dagenham there are queues on the A13 westbound to the Goresbrook interchange where a van's broken down. On the underground, the Bakerloo line can't run between Queen's Park and Harrow and Wealdstone, and Southeastern trains can't run westbound via Bexley Heath.
This is LBC. Ferrari now 0345 6060 973 LBC.
This is the sound.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 minutes before 8 and we'll come back to our conversation about the Diana interview in a moment. Let's turn to other matters though. and the news that nearly £200 million will be made available of government funding for charities and companies helping to rehabilitate criminals as part of a reform programme. What does that mean? Let's turn to Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor Robert Buckland, who joins me now. Thank you for coming on the show. So how exactly does the rehabilitation take place? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. So what I'm doing is reforming the probation service to bring it all together as a national service. But within that, there will be opportunities for charities and other organisations that specialise in working with offenders to get involved and to run appropriate supervision and rehabilitation programmes that are designed to get them away from a cycle of crime. 80% of our crimes in our country are committed by people who've done it before. And clearly, if we're going to really tackle and cut crime, we've got to deal with those people who are in that cycle of offending. And that's why these reforms, together with a big increase in the number of probation officers working out there in the field, will, I think, yield benefits in the years to come.
Why would it appear then that the rehabilitation programme is not working properly, Secretary of State?
Well, I think it's come through quite a few challenging years. Well-intentioned reforms that brought in new organisations have yielded some benefits, but I'm concerned that we really need to renew our work on the supervision of offenders, not just monitoring them, but getting them to do things. And I'm particularly keen on unpaid work, those orders that are made by courts for people to get on and do work to put something back into the community after they've taken something out due to crime. And I want to, in the months ahead, work to revivify and renew those efforts, get them more visible so that we can all see the benefits of unpaid work orders being carried out by people who've committed crimes.
It's a lot of money, I have to say, Lord Chancellor. How will we know if the money's been well spent? What should my listeners be looking out for as a sort of results programme?
Well, over the next few years, we'll be monitoring very intently to see the effect on reoffending rates. Now, this is tough work. We're dealing with some people, frankly, who have chaotic lifestyles and who've got entrenched in certain habits that lead them into crime. But together with the work I'm doing on drug treatment and addiction treatment as well, I think that we've got a combined approach here that will help see fewer offenders returning to that cycle of crime. Now, as I've said, it's tough work. Judge us on results, but I have put in place the mechanisms that can make sure that we keep monitoring performance to ensure that we drive down those crime rates.
OK. Just a couple of other matters while I have the benefit of you on the line, and you'll be expecting this question. Do you think that the disgraced journalist Martin Bashir has committed fraud with these bank statements?
Well, I think looking at the findings of Lord Dyson, clearly some very serious issues arise. I'm not going to comment about whether or not criminal offences have been committed here. I think that's a matter for the police and the investigating authorities. You wouldn't expect me to opine about that. But you read that. I mean, I'm sure you've looked at, like me, at the executive summary. It's a 127-page report, and you see some of the words being used there about false documents, forgery, etc. These are hugely serious matters that don't just raise questions about the individuals and the journalists involved, but also the senior leadership, sadly, who made decisions that Lord Dyson has, I think, rightly scrutinised and has found to be wrong. So a lot of work, I think, for the BBC to do in order to make good what happened here. Which is the bigger crime, in your view, Justice Secretary? Would it be the original corrupt interview or the 25-year cover-up? Well, I think a lot of us, will often say that sometimes the cover-up is worse than the crime. I mean, I think having listened to, both the Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex, I think you're struck, I think, by at a family level, the sense of tragedy and loss that comes through their statement. So let's just imagine it was any family, not the royal family. I think we should be just as indignant and concerned if somebody who was vulnerable was inveigled into giving an interview that perhaps might not have happened if standards of probity and honesty had been maintained. And then, of course, it's compounded by, as you describe, a cover-up or a failure to put right and to apply the very high standards that have got to apply to a public service broadcaster like the BBC.
Lastly on this, Michael, now Lord Grade, who of course you will recall served as BBC chairman, says the BBC now has to address this. They have to change, quotes, their culture. Would you agree, and if so, in what way?
Well, I think Lord Grade makes some very important observations, and indeed Oliver Dowden, my colleague in Cabinet, the Culture Secretary, has said that we need to look at governance issues. We'll do so in a calm and sober way. This report, as I've said, is lengthy. It needs to be read carefully. There might be issues that the report wasn't asked to deal with that need to be looked at as well. So let's do this in a cool way, but acknowledging the seriousness of what has happened here. The BBC has apologised. That, of course, is a start. But I think they themselves would acknowledge that much more needs to be done here in order to recover public confidence in the governance of what is our, Britain's public service broadcaster, who, has a job, an important role in freedom of expression, but also has a wider responsibility in terms of its governance and its responsibilities to the public.
You mentioned your colleague Oliver Dowden. Another of your colleagues, Matt Hancock, who talked of the test and trace system being a world leader or world beating. Certainly it's got a lot of funding. In total it'll be north of £30 billion by the time it's finished, I hasten to add. But it would appear that failure in the test and trace is now being blamed in what I read as an official report for the allowing the so-called Indian variant of coronavirus to spread. So test and trace has failed. Is that correct, Justice Secretary?
Well, I think it would be wrong to say that it's failed. It's been a developing system that I think has helped yield some very important results. Combined with everything else that we're doing on genomic sequencing and the vaccine, we've got the tools in our armoury to take a more calibrated approach to COVID and its variants wherever they appear. And like any system, of course, it will have moments and times when people feel that perhaps its coverage hasn't worked as well as we would like. But this is a huge system with millions of people taking part in it every day, and I think that when you compare it to other systems in the world, I think everybody would agree that Britain is amongst the leaders in having developed a system from scratch which continues to improve.
I don't know whether you've had sight or whether you will have sight, but a report by one of the affected councils, as yet unidentified, or unidentified to me, you may well know, said that the glitch was apparent in the system between April the 21st and May the 11th. That's not just a brief glitch, is it, Lord Chancellor? That's a glitch that was allowed to go on for week after week after week and affect the good folk of Blackpool, York, Bath, Bristol, Southend-on-Sea, Thurrock and others.
Well, look, Nick, I've not seen the report, and therefore I'm not able to give you informed comment as to what happened there. But I do know, and I think a lot of our experiences, having used it ourselves, will bear out the testimony that actually it has made and continues to make an important difference to the way in which we tackle COVID. Of course, it's not the only means by which we're going to do this. All the other tools that I've mentioned, which we didn't have, even 6 months ago, we now have, and that gives me, great confidence in terms of where we are with the roadmap. We've got to be cautious. We've got to be realistic and look at the evidence, which is why we'll make our assessment in mid-June. But now we're in a much stronger position to bear down on this disease and its variants whenever they arise.
All right, and one last one that really does play to your brief as Justice Secretary. Lady Lavinia Norse, who is the widow of a very eminent former High Court judge, who, of course, I'm sure you're aware, was cleared of 17 sex abuse charges in a matter of just a few short hours at a court in Peterborough. Delighted to say that the woman expressed relief, but sadly was in tears. Many of my listeners are puzzled. How could that ever have been brought to trial? And why doesn't someone have to answer for that decision? Lord Chancellor.
Well, of course, the Crown Prosecution Service is an independent authority that applies a simple test. Is there a reasonable prospect of conviction, and is it in the public interest to prosecute? I haven't seen the evidence in that case. The jury has made its findings.
Pretty swiftly as well, I have to say, Mr. Buckland. It took them just a few. Does that not speak to possibly the lack of merit in pursuing this case, Mr. Buckland?
Well, look, Nick, it would be wrong of me to start commenting about a case where I have not seen the evidence. You wouldn't want me to do that. It would be idle speculation.
Well, I would want you to do that, but I know that it's unlikely that you would do that, Mr. Buckland, because you can't. What I want and what I'll get are two very different matters, Mr. Buckland.
But well, Nick, look, I can't because I've not seen the evidence.
No, I agree.
I think for me to start commenting about independent decision making by a prosecutorial authority, there has to be.
But does the CPS need to be more answerable? Let's be broad on this. Lastly, does there need to be more accountability, Justice? Is that a fair observation?
Look, I think that's a very important and interesting observation. And as we develop policies, for example, in rape, we're going to be publishing an end-to-end rape review in a few weeks' time. Questions about accountability within the system, of course, arise. And I think that they are legitimate. I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to try and explain better the background for the reasoning, particularly, judges passing sensitive sentences in difficult cases. I'm all for much more light to be shed upon often the very well-reasoned arguments they put forward to pass the sentences they do. And similarly, I think much can be said as well for decisions made by authorities like the CPS. So yes, in a word, I am always interested in ways of increasing accountability, opening things up, so the public, even if they don't agree with decisions, can understand the reasoning behind them.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you very much, indeed, Robert Buckland, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor, appearing here on LBC, where 1 minute after 8, news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.